Hello, everyone, and happy Friday. It's the 26th of June, 2020. Everybody will note from a calendar marking perspective that on Monday, the 29th of June, 2020 is the 4-month mark since the first recorded death in the United States due to COVID-19, which happened in the state of Washington on February 29th. It seems like a lot has happened in 4 months, and we've certainly covered a lot of territory in these town halls and meetings, and I know that you've gone through a lot in your personal and professional lives in the last 4 months as well. One of the things that I hope to get through in the theme of the meeting today is that while it may seem like it's been a while, I think we're just in the maybe not tip of the iceberg, but very much the early stages of what the new COVID normal looks like. And given that, I expect continued robust dialogue. Make sure that you call in your questions or text in your questions, 707-412-8922. And Chief Higer and I will tee them up in the order that they arrive, and then he'll try and bin them or pocket them in like kind questions. Today is a Friday town hall for all of the Edwards Air Force Base community. We've been mentioning throughout the last 4 months, as we've had town halls virtually, that as the schedule updates or compresses, we'll let you know at every opportunity. So you'll note in the remarks that led into this presentation this afternoon that we're compressing all of the sit-in PA, studio, broadcast widely meetings and town halls. We're compressing those into the Friday session in this time slot. And so next Monday, we will not have the spouses and other group Monday. Next Thursday, we will not have the med group focus town hall. And instead, those two town hall focus meetings will compress into this one on Friday. And starting next Friday, the 10th, actually next Friday we're off because it's a holiday, but the 10th of July, when we'll kick off that new schedule, we'll have phone a friends either outside the room here in the PA studios, or we'll have them on a close recall via text or phone call. So if there are medical questions or issues or topics that you want to surface, we can quickly get answers to you there from a medical perspective. There's a bunch of reasons why we were compressing to one. Actually, it's not just one, but it's one publicly. We want wider broadcast. So you're welcome to share the link. The link will be somewhat static, and it will remain after the broadcast is over, at least through the duty day on Fridays, and in many cases throughout the weekend. So if you miss it during this time slot, you can see it through the weekend. The other reason we're compressing is that a lot of the questions that we've been receiving for the last 2-3 weeks, and maybe even month or more, at all the different audiences, from all the different audiences in the different town halls, revolved around effectively the same topics. And so instead of letting you or making you guess which one we're going to answer your question on, we're just going to put it all right here every Friday at 1300 on Fridays that are duty days. So next Friday, the 3rd of July, happy 4th, and will not be this, but we'll be here on the 10th of July. So with that, I want to foot stomp a couple things to start off, and then hopefully give you some time to text in your questions. First, this is a long fight. As what you're watching, if you're paying any attention to the national coverage right now, while the states of New York, New Jersey, and a couple other New England states are certainly on the decline and remaining there, you'll also note that significant populations across the nation, to include other parts of California, are absolutely setting new records and have been for more than weeks. There appears to be no change or no alteration to those trend lines, and so this fight is still with us. If there's any doubt in your mind as to whether the first wave is over or the first wave will get you, I argue strongly and adamantly that the first wave is not yet over. As you recall, 3 or more months ago, we were talking about flattening the curve. We did that. But just because we flatten the curve doesn't mean that you won't get infected, or that your family's not at risk, or that your coworkers or your mission are not vulnerable to a novel virus. And that is playing out in many states that are reverting to, or populations or communities or households that are reverting to habits that are pre-COVID. Make no mistake about it, this is a low probability of death virus for relatively healthy and young folks without comorbidities, but it isn't zero. There are well-documented cases where very young males, and actually males and females, but very young adults get COVID. They appear to get better, and then they have a rebound. It's a cytokine shock, or a cytokine wave or surge, and their immune system overreacts, and it literally kills them. And so that's one way that young, healthy people are dying, and it's not high prevalence, but it is certainly more than a handful of people in our nation. There's also a misperception or a concern that people throw away that this isn't at all threatening to children. That is also not true. There are a lot of autoimmune response diseases and responses that kids that have had COVID are now having major immune system reactions or overreactions, and it's causing problems for them as well. Again, relatively low prevalence, but it certainly isn't zero. Said another way, this is not the common cold. It is not a typical flu or flu-like bug, and we are all still vulnerable. And so you'll note that Chief and I, in all of our engagements, Colonel Reagan and now Colonel Gordon and all the other senior leadership here, have been literally pounding behavior. You want to know may I's, and we respond with, I'm not going to tell you yes or no. Here's what you know you need to do, and then make decisions appropriately. That's me respecting you as an adult, respecting you as a thinking and trusting individual, respecting the conversations that you have and the decisions you make with other adults that are risk-based, but not just risk-based for you today and tomorrow, risk-based for you, your family, your coworkers, and quite frankly, the community well into the duration of this pandemic. I still wear a mask in and out of my building every day. I still wear a mask when I'm on the installation, and there's any doubt in my mind that I'm gonna cross paths with somebody. And, ladies and gentlemen, Americans all, I wear my mask when I'm outside the installation, not because the California governor has said you must, but because I respect people that I don't know. And I wanna make sure that if I'm an asymptomatic carrier, which is entirely possible, that I'm not the one broadcasting or propagating that to the folks that I care about, even if I don't know them. I know you all think and feel the same thing, and I know, like you, I know that, like you long for what the world was pre-COVID, and so do I. Trust me. And you can't wait to get to a new normal that somewhat resembles the old. But I think that new normal is still a year or more away. It will be vaccine-enabled, and there will be a lot of other things that we have to go through to get there. So help us all get there in the best possible state. Use risk management in all aspects. I'm going to release an update later today. It's about ready to be signed to the what we call the Omnibus COVID Directive for Edwards and Plant 42. But I'm going to update that. It will have some revisions in it. I'm happy to highlight those revisions in a Q&A session, but off the top of my nugget, and back me up here, Chief, the revisions to the COVID directive were at HPCon Bravo. And at HPCon Bravo, if you have a visitor that you would like to visit you because you're a resident, the dorms or in base housing on Edwards Air Force Base, that is now approved at HPCon Bravo, but you have to have documentation from a supervisor, not a supervisor, but a commander, a deputy director, a director, an operations officer, a SHIRT, or a senior enlisted leader. And in that discussion that you have to get the approval for your visitor, I need you to have a frank, candid, and honest conversation on how that visitor is not going to be more risk to you, and you're not going to be more risk to that visitor, and your interactions with that visitor on the installation are not going to be more risk to the installation. And I trust that you're going to make good decisions in the right conditions under the right circumstances. If I'm your supervisor or commander and you want to have those granular, detailed conversations with me, I look forward to having those, and I will help you get to a best scenario that is a risk-balanced approach. Examples of, cool, I can have visitors on the base. I'm going to have a party at my house. I'm going to invite all my friends from downtown. We're going to number into the hundreds, and we're going to party all night. Masks are optional because it's inside my residence. That type of scenario would not apply. In fact, that would actually be contrary to a legal order. However, if you want to have someone that's on base and you want to sit out in your front yard around a campfire after sunset and enjoy the nice evening in the Mojave, physically separating, allowing the airflow to happen that naturally happens at Edwards, that is perfectly acceptable and very, very reasonable risk. It is also very good social connectedness, and that's really what I'm concerned about and trying to enable you to have. So that's one significant but relatively minor change to the COVID directive. There are a couple others along the way, but another big one that often gets asked, hey, can we let retirees have more access to the base? I've decided that we are, in fact, going to open up the base to retirees on Sundays, and that will be effective this Sunday. So those are two major changes that are in the directive. There's a couple other happy glads, but I need you to read it. I need you to read it. I need you to consume it. There are a lot of portions in there that are recommended best practices. I've been asked, why are they there if they're just recommended? Well, they're there because they give you granularity behind commander's intent. And you'll note that the commander's intent language also has some mandatory provisions in it. I've already mentioned one of those. Those are face coverings. Another one is all aspect and comprehensive risk management. And a third one is compliance with the principles of counter-COVID behaviors. There are four. They are maximizing airflow, minimizing the number of people, maximizing the space within which you have the contacts with those folks, and minimizing the duration of the contact you have with them. And if you comply with those, and when you can't comply with one, maximally complying with the other three will help keep you safe, your family safe, your coworkers safe, and continue to do your part to get our installation, our mission, and our community and our region through this in the best possible state. I'm sure there's lots of questions on that topic, but I also don't want to just limit it to COVID because you may have other questions or observations as well. So that, Chief, if we don't have any, I'll talk about some more, but go ahead.
We've got a couple, sir. First one I'd like to attack. So the question is, when will the gym open to dependents during the week instead of only on Saturday and Sunday? They're saying that we're probably going to be full during those because if you don't know, we have a max capacity in the gym with COVID, and we don't know what it's going to look like, so we could hit those capacity limits. The question or the answer to that question is it's going to take a little bit of time, so I'd ask for your patience. What we don't want to do is go from only restricting to active duty to opening it up to everybody every single day, all hours of the day. If we have an outbreak in the gym, we don't know where that came from. And so as we stair-step through and make sure, can we actually get to capacity? What does capacity look like? How do we keep people out safely? And so if you're one of those people who come to the door and they tell you you're going to have to wait or you can't come in because we're at capacity, we're going to need your patience there as well. But we need to stair-step this through. So we started with active duty because active duty have a requirement to still maintain physical fitness even though we're not doing physical fitness testing during this time frame. And then we opened up to government civilians and small groups of dependents. And so as we wait to see what happens with that and we do these stair-step approaches, I just ask for your patience. So the answer is I'm not sure, but it's going to be at least another week or two as we get in and see what the effects and what did we do right or wrong with the changes that are taking place right now, and what did we learn that we need to implement next time. Sir, one of the questions I have that you're probably best in answering is now that we're in this new normal, is blue-silver teaming going away?
Yeah, so one of the questions, so it's a great question, and the answer is it depends. And so let me give you some more granularity on that. Much like the question that Chief just answered about the gym, I'm not making decisions about the gym. I've told the MSG, so Colonel Holman and soon Colonel Harris, to work with the FSS and the professionals that are in the gym every day, and it's their job, to make good decisions based on public health best practices. That's no different than what I've asked all of you to do in the COVID-19 directive. Said another way to the blue-silver response is mission owners have the authorization to leave blue-silver teaming when they think they can comply with the required force health protection measures and in a deliberate way, with appropriate training and PPE to get their mission back up to as much of pre-COVID capacity as possible. And so if you're asking me when are we going away from blue-silver, I need to know what unit you're with, and if I know the answer, I'll answer it, because I certainly don't know all of them. As an example, I asked a team at a COVID CAT recently, hey, are you still at blue-silver? And they said, no, sir, we got out of that and went to other mitigations about 10 days ago. And that was perfectly fine. I didn't need to know when they left blue-silver because, to be blunt, I didn't direct that we go into blue-silver. That was subordinate, commander, leader, innovative thinking that kept mission alive and helped maximally protect the force when we weren't sure just how bad this first COVID wave was going to smash us at Edwards. And to be really blunt, we're still not sure how bad this continuing first wave is going to smash us here. So if you have a specific unit that you're asking about blue-silver, then let me know. The largest number of folks that are on blue-silver are in the maintenance group. And unless something's changed in the last couple days, the maintenance group intends to go away from blue-silver in early July. And for specifics on what that means to you and your shift and your time, talk to your supervisor and go through the maintenance chain of command to find out how it specifically applies to you and your work unit. And that has been clearly communicated, and if you're a bargaining unit eligible employee, it's been notified with appropriate timelines there as well. But it will be based on conditions. You know, there could be a massive surge that's already developing, and we just don't know it yet, that would make us retrench or retreat from that position as well. So stand by and talk to your local leadership. But if you have the specific unit question, ask, and we'll see if we can get an answer for you via phone a friend. Any other questions?
Yes, sir. We got plenty. We've got a few questions coming in about the CDC. So now that we're in Bravo, when's the CDC going to go to full capacity, and when will family members who are enrolled know whether they are whether there's a spot available for their children?
So let me take a step back, because the question caveat was now that we're at Bravo, and then a question. It's really important for me to make sure that I give you a little insight into why I thought Bravo was the right decision for Edwards Air Force Base and Plant 42. I will tell you up front, definitively, we are not at Bravo because the threat outside the gate, and certainly the threat in Southern California, has abated or reduced. In fact, you can look at data from Los Angeles County and the state of California, and you can clearly see that the threat is actually worse today and a week ago than it was 2 weeks ago. And so that's where we went from Charlie to Bravo. We went from Charlie to Bravo for a couple reasons. One, the installation met the gating criteria and allowed me the decision space to increment down from HPCon Charlie to HPCon Bravo. The three major components of that, those gating criteria, were capacity in the hospitals, which this community has done an exceptional job there. That's one we met. Decreasing levels of flu or flu-like symptoms. The data was hard to get, but clearly a level to downward trend over more than the 14-day required. And then the debatable one, or the controversial one, was a downward trend of COVID positive cases and COVID 7-day average over the last 14 days or more. So depending on how you draw that bubble, certainly the state of California didn't meet that. Los Angeles County didn't meet that. The Antelope Valley probably met that, but our cases on the installation and in our population certainly did. And the difference there is what gave me the confidence to go from Charlie to Bravo. In an environment of increasing cases, you continue to do the right thing for yourself, for your family, for your cohabitants, for your roommates, for your squadron work unit, for your coworkers, and for the installation. And because of that, the move from Charlie to Bravo was a testament to my trust and confidence that we're going to continue to do the right thing in the face of this threat, because you know this threat and you respect this threat, and we're beating this threat in a very small population. Now, if any of those assumptions revert, we may have no choice, or I may have no choice, but to put us back into Charlie. So Bravo and CDC full capacity. There will be significant limits on the number of children that we can have enrolled in the CDC due to COVID. I can't imagine as a parent asking to put my child into a pre-COVID type of rule set in a child care scenario. So I trust and I have full confidence that the CDC is slowly expanding their capacity and trying to get to what they think is their return to full capacity state by bringing in a few more workers, making sure that we have the right cohort sizes for the kids, and then doing internal protection measures like, for example, not allowing other than caregivers back in with the kids so that the adults are not an inclusion or an introduction of the virus. So I don't think the CDC is going to get back to full capacity or the student load that it had per se before COVID hit anytime in the near future. But I do think there's significant underutilized or unused capacity that we had in the mission essential posture. So if you want to know where you sit on the waiting list or how far away are you from getting a slot in the CDC, then have that conversation as a parent with the CDC. In parallel, I know that Jeff Holman and Paul Keenan, the MSG and the FSS commander and director respectively, are working in detail on a by name, by family basis with your squadron commanders, directors, shirts, so that you can interactively know where you fall above and below a cut line based on the projected availability in the CDC. Chief, that was a fast-moving ball game about 48 hours ago. I haven't seen any further updates on that, but I believe that information is or will rapidly become available to the individual families from their supervisor, commander, or directly with the CDC. Have you seen any updates today on that?
I don't think supervisors have that level of information or that level of detail yet. I think
director shirts.
They should, at least, if they don't have it right now. I didn't see an email this morning, but there was a lot of discussion going on yesterday, and I haven't seen just the all the answers from the MSG or the FSS yet, but it could have come in the last hour while we've been in this room. So in the near future, we will have that. But again, it has to be a private conversation with you and the CDC, because I can't sit here with a list and start rattling off who has access, because everybody's situation is different. There's different priorities, mission essential, non-mission essential, all those things are variables that go into effect in that.
Yeah, if you are being asked to go back to work, because, for example, your work unit is going off of blue-silver teaming, and now you need daycare 5 days a week every week, as opposed to just 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. That's a conversation you need to have with the CDC, informed by your squadron commander or director, and work that through with them. I'm really confident that we're going to increase capacity at the CDC at a deliberate state to meet need, and when we approach capacity, we'll let you know. So that's a lot of information around your relatively specific, but we can't answer it in specific unless we know your exact scenario, exact placement on the waiting list. And for that, I'm just going to have to refer you to the FSS and then specifically the CDC.
So we got one actual shout out. So on this forum, I think it was last week, it might have been the week before, somebody had called out that there were some lights not working over by Panda Express, and they wanted to say thank you for turning those on. So that was not myself or General Higer. That was our CE professionals over in the CE group and Mr. Judkins, who sent a team over there to go ahead and take care of it. And so most of the time these things happen, we have no idea that it's going on. And so report that up. And then if it's something that we have on base or the capability to do that on base, those guys at CE and gals will fix it immediately. And if not, then they've got the part incoming or the subject matter expertise coming. So thank you for the shout out. Sir, we do have a question on Southgate.
Okay.
We going to full hours on Southgate, or are we keeping the hours that we have?
Yes and yes. And so let me give you a couple of details on that. Much like what I've already told you about the CDC and what we've already talked about with the gym, I'm allowing the Security Forces Squadron Commander, in consultation with the MSG, to slowly ramp back up in the increments that they think are necessary access at the Southgate. I have every expectation that if we are able to hold our positivity rate as a community, as an Edwards Air Force Base and Plant 42 community, at the level it's currently at, which requires all of us to do exceptionally good counter-COVID behaviors, that security forces will continue to have the manpower required to open up the Southgate back to what it was hours pre-COVID. So we're going to get there, and that will be our new steady state. So eventually, in COVID, our gates will be what they were before COVID. How many days or how many weeks is it going to take us to get there, and in exactly what increments to get there, I don't know. As those are known specifically, we'll get information out via multiple communication paths. If there happens to be anybody from Security Forces or MSG that wants to phone a friend and give an answer on your next increment to Chief, you can. But let me talk about a broader principle in play here. The counter-COVID directive has on the bottom of the front page a phrase that says, if you are aware of or you become aware of a negative impact or something that you think could be better or unintended second or third order consequences, we need the feedback. I understand all of the lives that you lead. I want to try to understand all that, but unless we know something could be slightly better, we don't know what to adjust or how to fix it. And so on the bottom of the first page of the counter-COVID directive, there's an email address that you can send observations or recommendations to. And my commitment to you is that we will update this directive on a recurring basis. Monthly is probably about the right battle rhythm to do that. The other thing that you can do is feed us in this forum or feed us through that email address or any one of a number of ways that there's something we could do to potentially make your life simpler or easier. An example of that was when Chief and I were visiting a work unit Monday, I believe. And we heard from that work unit. We surprised them. They didn't know we were on the way. We walked in and, hey, how's it going? We're chatting a little bit about where you're from, what's your Air Force story. And then we typically, in all of those sessions with a handful or more of airmen being active duty civilian and contractors, say, hey, free shots, what do you got for us? And they said, if you could just get the gate open a couple more minutes, maybe even a half hour earlier, that would help us significantly. And so that type of granular input, we flipped and got to security forces, and they're inputting that type of input into their plan. Now, to be really candid and blunt here, if the number of folks that would use expanded Southgate hours are a very small number, security forces are going to ask me to not use their manpower on the gate for a handful of people. So that will also inform when and how and in what increments we open things like Southgate. It'll also inform things like when do we open dining hours and when do we open other services or points of service on the base in a broader way. I expect that if all the trend lines on the installation continue and the problems we're having as a state and in LA County reverse, that we could easily be back to full pre-COVID gate hours in about a month. And if we can accelerate that, we certainly will, but those are TBD right now. Chief, next.
Yes, sir. So is the base going to still have mission essential, mission critical, operationally necessary restrictions or caveats for personnel on the base?
Yes. So the base is remaining mission essential, mission critical, and operationally necessary. There are lots of good reasons why I need the base to remain that way. Now, let me tell you where I want us to be. I want us to be at HPCon Alpha, ideally, but maybe a Bravo, and with additional restrictions on the base. But to get there, we have to have the facilities and the places on the base open up with a relatively low use case so they can learn and they can iterate on their counter-COVID practices and procedures. For example, I guarantee that the barbershop, which is now open, by the way, will be able to do much more throughput in about a month after the barbers and the patrons understand what's expected of them to minimize spread of the virus than they do today or they did last week when they opened. And so learning and maturing those counter-COVID processes and procedures in an environment where we have a reduced load makes a lot of sense. It's a lot less frustration for the people that are in line or trying to use those services. It's a lot less risk in case the procedure or process that we set up isn't as beneficial as we believe it to be before we open up to that. That was a strong recommendation, and I heard her loud and clear from my Med Group commander. Let's open up things and see how these are working before we increase the population. Now, on the flip side of that, I also heard many of you loud and clear that, hey, retirees have benefits that they would like to use that are well-earned. I could not agree more with that on the installation. And so what other times can we get retirees on the base is often a question that Chief and I have fielded in all of these forums, and I already told you earlier in this broadcast that the procedures and the processes for retirees on Wednesday will remain, even though we are mission essential, mission critical, and operationally necessary. And in addition to that, we'll also make it another retiree day effective this Sunday and every Sunday going forward. So that's a way that we're slowly increasing in a deliberate way back to full access to the base. Once we go to HPCon Alpha, that would be the latest period of time where I would keep when we go to Alpha, I will not have mission essential, mission critical, and operationally necessary restrictions at the gates. And I know the defenders are looking forward to that too. If I can remove that restriction before we go to Alpha, I will, but right now it's still at least a couple weeks out. No other changes, however, to how you get on as mission essential, mission critical, or operationally necessary are in place right now or anticipated for the duration of Bravo. Chief?
Yes, sir. Two-part question, and I think I'll take the first part and then throw it over to you for the second. So are there any updates on members who are deployed right now? Will they have to quarantine when they return? And when that member does return, can they take leave out of state in September? And so I'll tackle the first part. Based on the newest rules that the general has put out, there is no restriction or there is no rule that says you automatically quarantine just because you were out of the local area, and deployments are part of that. However, if you are exhibiting symptoms, if you are around somebody who tested positive for COVID, those are both reasons to go into a quarantine status. The other one is if, let's say, they're deployed right now and they're deployed to Iraq or Afghanistan, and in their transit back, they went through 5 or some major airports, and they're kind of concerned. In that situation, they need to talk to public health. And I say that because I am not a medical expert, and so they need to talk to public health, probably get checked out a little bit and make sure. But there's not going to be a requirement just because they were in the Middle East, just because they were downrange somewhere, that they automatically have to quarantine. Now, what things are going to look like in September, I'm going to have to hand that over to General Higer.
As he remics. That question about what do you need to do when you return from a deployment is Chief whacked it out, got at least a triple, if not a home run on that. I removed travel-based quarantine approaching a month ago. That doesn't mean that there aren't good reasons that you want to send somebody into a quarantine to be safe, and you'll know what that is from your squadron leadership. Can we take leave outside the state? So there's a whole bunch of thoughts here. The whys matter. So I have a draft ready to be signed exceptions to policy that are fairly broad-reaching for leave that is effectively what we would call emergency leave for the death of an immediate family member, either the service member's immediate family or the service member's spouse's immediate family. The specific details will be in that letter, and if you are in that unfortunate scenario, please work with your SHIRT, your SEL, your commander, your director, and we're going to do the right thing to make sure that you can take care of yourself and your family. And that will effectively become a blanket exception to policy that the squadron commander will have to execute via verbal notifications. So that's one reason why you can take leave, which frankly will be higher risk travel in this COVID environment than it would have been pre-COVID. Another reason that I think there's a very good reason for a blanket exception to policy is that if you are traveling to comply with a child custody agreement or arrangement, or you're some type of a co-parent action, and I can come up with a lot of actual scenarios, but I'm not going to divulge anybody's personal information, but that's another very good and very valid reason for you to do that. Now, if is that I want to take a vacation, and I want to take a vacation in pick a state, Michigan, or pick a state, Ohio, or pick a state, Kentucky, or pick a state, Maine, and I just want to go there because that's where I want to go on leave. And the reasons may be that's where you have family, or that's where you had a previous plan. The chances of that happening in September are not zero, but that's asking me to predict a long way out. What I know right now is that you have a relatively large COVID-19 local area, and that is the entirety of the California. It does not include high-density urban areas or high-density activities, and that's listed in the map that's literally hanging on the website right now. I anticipate that on Monday I'm going to expand that local area for leave and pass, but it will not be the entirety of the continental United States, and the stipulations will continue to be don't go to dense urban places unless you're traveling through them, and don't go to any high-density activities. I can give you examples of how high-density activities are causing clusters, and they're bringing back or increasing risk for you and your family. And so if you want to have leave or plan leave in July, August, September, through the fall, start talking to your squadron commander or your squadron director now and let them know what you're thinking about, reflect back to them what your trade space is, and then have a good, meaty conversation about risk management. And remember that this is a long fight. This is an enemy, and it's a real threat to you, your family, the people you want to go visit, and the mission that you accomplish after you return from your leave. So that's a non-answer to your question because I have no idea what the world's going to look like in September. If it looks like it does today, it'll depend on what state you want to go to, and you can have that conversation with your squadron commander director, and they'll be able to give you further guidance. I hope that was good enough on that one. If not, let us know. Chief, what else?
Sir, I've got a very long question on here, but I'm going to try to paraphrase the best I can. So if you're watching and I paraphrase it wrong, please let me know and I'll reattack. So in your last document that you put out, you talk about how coronavirus is a low threat, especially for healthy people. Yet then there's a massive list of things that we're supposed to do. We're limiting gates. We're limiting the way we work. We're doing a lot of movements for something that's a low threat. Why are we doing all that if this threat is so low?
Okay. So there's I'll argue your premise that it's a low threat. I have never said, and I've never implied that this is a low threat. I've implied and said many times that there's a low probability of this being a deadly threat to someone that's of an active duty age and stage in life, unless you have some underlying high-risk activity. There are estimates right now that I'm hearing in the last week or so that we are probably underreporting the number of Americans that have had COVID by at least a factor of 2 and potentially a factor of 10. So think about that. That's right now we're just over 2 million documented cases in the nation. 2.2, 2.3 is what the last number I remember hearing, and that it's easily double that. Close to 5 million Americans, and it could be as many as 20 to 25 million Americans have had this. So it's highly contagious, The good news is that in a majority of the cases that most people recover just fine. But that is not in fact true for all cases. And here's the big problem with this specific threat. Unlike almost everything that we've dealt with in our adult lives and maybe in our pre-adult lives, this threat is contagious before you are symptomatic. And so if you become symptomatic and we have to do contact tracing, we go back at least 2, but generally 2 or more days in the people you've had contact with. And so I don't know what I'm going to feel like 2 days from now. But 2 days from now, if I spend 15 minutes inside of a specific bubble or specific environment with someone, then they are likely exposed at an infectious dose to COVID. And that is completely unique in my personal experience, completely unique. That may be true for the flu. It may be true for the cold, although I don't think so. But the consequences of the flu and the consequences of the cold are actually much less severe than what they are for COVID. And so why do we have all these measures? We have a lot of these measures because we are responding as a nation to this. As you'll recall, my commander's intent is to do what we can to mitigate the risk here on the installation and preserve our mission. The AFMC commander's intent is an all-in commitment to COVID-19 or counter COVID-19 measures and continuing our wartime missions. And the same thing is true from the Secretary of Defense, who has also implemented a lot of our restrictions. Again, historically, as you recall, I did not take this installation to HPCon Charlie, the SecDef did. And to remove ourselves from HPCon Charlie, we had to meet gating criteria together. So collectively, I think the nation responded well in March and April. And I think the jury's out on whether the nation is collectively continuing to respond well to this very real threat. I hear stories, legitimate stories, and real anecdotes from a few of my installation commander peers around the nation. And there are a couple of them in environments where they are legitimately considering recalling many, if not all, of their active duty forces inside the wire to protect them from the massive and catastrophic spread that's happening in the community outside the gates. And so think about that and how different that is from where we are right now. And then commit to yourself to continue to do your part to make sure that that does not happen outside our gates. I think inside the wire, we're still an extremely safe place to be, to live, to work, and to recreate when you can. But outside the wire, we don't want it to become that way as it has around a couple other installations in the United States. So I hope I've addressed it philosophically. I'll end the answer to that question with the 4 principles again. Actually had a copy which I snuck and grabbed in the studio while Chief was answering a question earlier. But the 4 COVID principles, the counter COVID principles, are relatively straightforward. And again, they revolve around air circulation, physical separation, duration of exposure, and cohort size. So the fewer the number of people that you're in close contact with, the better. The shorter the duration of time that you're exposed to someone else, the better. The more physical separation you have from other folks that you don't cohabitate with, the better. And the more circulation, preferably outside, you have, the better. And if you can maximize all 4 of those, you're clearly meeting intent. You're doing your responsibility and your part for the nation, for yourself, for your family, for your coworkers, and for our mission here at Edwards. And so certainly not a low-risk environment. Even though there may be a low probability to you of risk of death as an individual, it certainly is not low risk. I hope I addressed some thought behind that. If I didn't, I'd love to dialogue and interact with you more. This is one of the huge limitations of this style of a town hall, to have a back and forth or follow-up questions. So if you can get them in, if not, catch me from at least 6 feet, but more like 10 or 15 away. We'll both have our masks on and we can talk. I love having those conversations, and I think they're very important. Chief?
Sir, we're getting a message saying that some squadron commanders are still requiring members to quarantine strictly based on travel, without any COVID exposure or any symptoms. That doesn't mesh with what we just said, so what's your message there?
My message is let your squadron commander, have a good conversation with your squadron commander and sit down with the current COVID-19 local directive with the paragraph that says travel, I've got it right here, so let me get the phrase out. The COVID-specific travel-specific quarantine is no longer required. And I can't find it right now, but I'll find it when Chief is talking in the next question. I'll get it to you. But my point there is that sit down with your squadron commander or your supervisor and ask to understand, ask for clarity, ask to learn, ask to know the basis of their request to quarantine. You'll note that I haven't said you no longer have to quarantine. I've said and removed the requirement to quarantine based on just travel. There are a whole bunch of other great reasons to quarantine, not the least of which you're a close contact to someone that's become positive, and that's our test, isolate, trace, and quarantine strategy. There are other very good reasons to quarantine also, and that would be if you are a person that works in a unit where that unit is a one to make one. They don't have any defense in depth. They can't blue silver. There's nobody else to do that job. And your exposure of that team and the environment is mission failure risk for your squadron commander and director. So that's not a travel-related quarantine. That's a mission protection quarantine. And I guarantee you that all squadron commanders and directors here are mitigating risk in ways they can, and if that's the only way available for that squadron commander and director in your scenario or that work unit scenario, then I support that. But ask to understand, seek to understand, and then let them know that there's no longer the requirement, and see if there's another way that you can mitigate that risk. So I hope that answers that, but please don't misquote me. Please quote me, but don't misquote me. I haven't said you don't have to quarantine. I've said, and the memo says clearly, travel-based only quarantine is no longer required. Quarantines beyond that are up to the specific scenario of the mission and the specific scenario of why you'd need to quarantine other than for travel. I hope that answers the question. Chief?
And one thing I wanted to jump on, it was the question that you were answering, sir, 2 questions ago about the threat and why are we doing all of this? Why are we doing all of this if it's a low risk? One of the big things that the general always talks about is knowing the threat. If at the beginning of March there was this disease that we were getting 2,500 new cases a day, what's happening in LA County? The last 2 days have been about 2,500, all-time highs. And if you would have talked to me 5 days ago, I would have said the 2 or 3 previous days, it wouldn't have been 2,500, it would have been 22 or 21, but they would have been all-time highs. And that keeps happening if you look at the charts. And so we can't go a week without another all-time high happening in LA County. But we weren't having those numbers at the time. We were having much lower numbers, but it was this threat that we did not understand. And not to say that we understand everything about it, but we know a lot more. And we know what things can work and help and what things don't, or what things add risk. And so that is how we're able to go down and step down to a lower HP con. That's how we're able to hopefully use the gym safely, but we've got to test it. That's how, I answered it in the questions, but use indoor dining. You're going to see indoor dining start to open up, but it's not going to be the general saying you will open up the club or you will open up Burger King. It is, if you work with public health, if you follow proper safety measures, if public health signs off on your plan, you are allowed to open up. And then each one will open up as they feel that's necessary. However, as they open, they're going to learn things. They're going to realize that maybe 30, and I'm making that number up, but 30 is too many people. Maybe 27 is the right number. They're going to learn these stats and these facts, and then they're going to change their plan based on that, and that's part of that flexibility that I need from you. And so as we move forward, I hope that we don't say this next week, but next week we could very easily have, again, record cases in Los Angeles County or in Kern County. And so we'll continue to learn and we'll continue to pivot. Sir, one of the questions that keeps coming in from a few people, on-base pools, what's the plan there?
Yeah, so I will answer that question to the extent that I know it. The quote that I couldn't find in response to the last one on quarantine is, quote, "There is no requirement to quarantine based solely on travel outside the COVID-19 local area." And so make sure you take that paragraph to your, paragraph, which is paragraph III Roman numeral 3.5 in the directive. All right, pools. I told FSS, gosh, Chief, 3 weeks ago, maybe more,
yes, sir,
that I'd like them to start tracking down the path to opening up the Oasis Aquatic Center. Why? Well, if you look at what the temperatures were doing outside in the ambient environment about 3 weeks ago, we started to reliably hit hundreds, and I no longer think that you have large enough windows outside to do your fitness outside, and therefore, how do you cross-train? Well, the pool is a great option for that. So FSS is trending in a direction to get the Oasis Aquatic Center open. There were a couple maintenance breaks that happened in there, and then it's going to take time. Now, to the other pools on the installation. So there's a pool at the youth center. I don't know the status on that, but FSS has the priority of Oasis before that, and I'm sure they'll get to it when they can. The other pool that I'm sure all of you are interested in is the, well, not all, but many people are interested in, and so are my kids, is the Mojave Sky Community Center pool that Corvius owns and operates. And that's the right phrase, that Corvius owns and operates. And so Corvius has to figure out what they want to do in compliance with public health guidance and compliance to make sure that the pool doesn't become a repository or a spreading location of COVID. Examples that I have from public pools in other municipalities are first of all, the public health answer to can the virus survive in pool water is almost uniformly no. So the real risk then becomes in an environment where you can't have a mask on your face because everything's wet, how are we going to prevent spread person to person outside of family units or cohabitants? I've seen other municipalities do things like massively limiting the number of people that can be in the pool area at a time and taking time slot reservations. So, for example, a time slot reservation for an hour with 15 minutes before and after that to make sure everybody's out before the next cohort enters. And then what I remember about that community pool in the Desert Sky location is it could probably hold on the order of a handful of families, but probably not much more of that, ensuring that the families are all separated when they're out of the pool. And then how do you keep the kids from commingling in the pool above water and breathing in each other's faces? Good luck doing that if you're the lifeguard or if you're the facility owner. That's going to be a parental requirement. And it's not going to take too many violations of the kid-to-kid, potentially cross-contaminating folks before the owner or the installation commander is going to say that's no longer worth the risk, and we're going to have to remove that liberty. So I think Corvius is tracking in that direction, but that's something that you'll have to ask them direct. I support their decisions, whichever way they decide to go. And I think that's a great resource that we can open, but we need to do so in a deliberate and methodical manner. And so that's the answer on 3 of the pools on the base. And I encourage you to get your exercise in the aquatic pool if you can, and then use the shoulder seasons on the heat of the day, so very early morning and late at night to get outside when it's not quite as hot as it is in the middle of the day. And that's the best answer I have today. A week from now, I'm sure I'll have an update on all those for you. Chief?
Sir, next question goes into the dining facility, so I'll attack this one. Is dining facility opened up for non-meal card holders for use or takeout? So, and the answer right now is no, but it goes along the lines with what General Higer said. The FSS has been asked to look into what we have on base right now for our meals, and then how do we expand that. One of the big problems we had originally is we did not know how much COVID was going to mess up our distribution, and we have a whole host of airmen that don't have a pantry and refrigerator. Those 2 things exist only in one building, and that's in the dining facility. And so we had to make sure that they had food and they were good to go. And so that meant removing everyone else from being and using the dining facility to save that food that we had. Now, our distribution channels have been great. And so originally, as soon as we figured that out, we asked, hey, let's open that up. The problem that we run into is when we did not have indoor dining, it was difficult because the amount of money that it costs for the to-go containers actually starts adding up in the thousands of dollars a month. And there's no easy way to just charge you 20 extra cents per container in order to make that happen. Just because the way the funding works, it's different accounts. And so it gets into a weird legal issue with accounts and money. But now that we're starting to open up indoor dining, which could happen in the next couple of weeks at different facilities, one of those we're looking at is the dining facility. But that is not a decision that's going to be made at the front office or the wing headquarters level. That's something that the general has asked the FSS director and his superintendent to look into. How do they do that safely? And how many airmen does it mean? How many can dine in and dine out? But the biggest problem is bringing in people and trying to do dine out or take out because we just don't have enough of the containers. So that's a supply chain issue and a cost issue. And so we're working through that. But we want to make sure the other options, so at least there are options on base for everybody. And then as we can work through each one, we will. Sir, we got an interesting question for you. I talked about the spiking numbers across the region, and you just opened up the local area, 7 days ago. Have you thought about bringing the local area back in because of all those threats we're seeing throughout the state?
Yeah, so absolutely, right, I've thought about it. But I remain very confident in the decision that I made to open up the local area to the entire state of California. And I am also confident for the same reason that when I open up the local area, most likely on Monday, even further, that we're going to continue to do the thing that gives me the confidence. And that is, and you've heard me say it many times, and if this is the first time you've heard me say it, you're going to hear me say it again. I almost guarantee it. I need us all to get out of geography-based, if I'm here, I'm safe, but if I'm over there, I'm not. That does not make sense, and it doesn't comply with a knowledge of the threat that we now have about COVID. You can be terribly COVID risky in your neighbor's house and be perfectly COVID risk compliant driving your closed car with air on recirculation through the heart of downtown Los Angeles today, right? And so we need to continue to morph away from the mentality of geography keeps us safe, because it's now ubiquitous and it's everywhere. In January, February, and maybe even in March, the spread of the disease to different regions was very valid. And that's where the local area and the thou shalt not travel and the stop movement guidance really clamped us down so that we would not contribute to or exacerbate the spread of the disease to all the communities in our nation. That has happened. It happened without military movement, and it happened in a somewhat natural manner. Now that the virus is ubiquitous across the United States and in virtually every community, town, and certainly very much in every state, the geography portion is becoming less relevant, and what becomes even more relevant, and it's always been, but even more so, is your behavior. Where you choose to go, why you choose to go, what risks you know you're assuming when you get there, and the things that you can do to minimize risk. So I'll ask you a rhetorical question. Is going to a big box store, so think a Walmart or a Costco, does that comply with commander's intent, my commander's intent? And the rhetorical answer is, well, sir, sure, it's good to go. Like, well, it's actually not, right? And so it depends is the real answer at a big box store. So if you want to go to a Costco or a Walmart or Lowe's or anything else like that, because you need to get something for your pantry or work on your residence or any one of a number of reasons, and you drive to the parking lot, you have your mask, right? Because that's a big part of showing you care, wear because you care. And you get to the parking lot and you have a hard time finding a parking place. And you have to park rows and rows and rows away from the entrance, and you go, wow, there's a lot of people here. And you don't turn around and drive away then. You park, and you walk into the store, and you get to the store, and you see there's absolutely no way you're going to be able to maintain 6-foot separation for more than a couple seconds at a time in that store. And you continue to press into that store, and you do all your shopping. You go through and touch do the touchpad things, which many of us are trying to get around, but nobody's perfectly avoided. And then you walk out and you go back to your car. That is very different risk that I just described than if you do the same thing at 6 a.m. when they open and you get a front row parking seat and there are more employees than customers in the same store. And so knowing when to do a tactical aviation thing and abort, turn around and go home because the risk is more elevated than you're willing to take is a very important thought process that you need to be willing and able to take going forward. And you can do that in any geography, so why would I restrict your geography? If you know that the county of Los Angeles and the counties around the Bay Area are spiking in their COVID best practices and you need to go there or you have to drive through there, then be a smart individual and don't stop and avoid large crowds. Comply with the COVID best practices and principles, and you'll reduce your risk to probably a very acceptable level. So get away from geography and focus on behavior. That's how I answer the question about what local area questions.
So I think we have time for one quick question. So we've had a lot of people at home teleworking right now. Mm-hmm. So if we're starting to bring in more people are coming back to the base, what about those that are teleworking and doing that successfully?
So at HPCon, so remember I told you I went to HPCon Bravo not because the threat outside the gates is less. I went to HPCon Bravo despite the fact that the threat is arguably greater outside the gates than it was in Charlie, but because you're doing exceptionally well in your counter-COVID application of practices and behaviors. And one of those COVID best practices and behaviors is that if you can telecommute and it's effective for your mission, then continue to do so. And that will continue long after we're at HPCon Alpha, and I predict will be a legacy of us going through this COVID environment together. I believe and assess personally that being able to telecommute one day out of every week or one day out of every 2 weeks will make that person or that individual much more effective and efficient overall, not just because they don't have or because they can do their work in t-shirt and flip-flops, but because they'll be able to focus in a different way and in a different manner and think in a different way as they're telecommuting than they would if they were in the office. And if it's 1 day of telecommuting and 9 days in the office or vice versa, I think those will remain open and available to all of you for the indefinite future. If your supervisor or commander is mandating that you leave telework and you're telework eligible just so that you can do the same work at your desk that you can otherwise do at home, please have a conversation with them and highlight the fact that you're finding yourself to be much more efficient and effective at home if you can do some type of a telework schedule. I am highly confident that they'll be receptive to that conversation and continue to enable maximum telework where we can. But you're right, we're going to trend to put more people back in the office because we are getting better at operating this environment, not because the risk is lower. And for time, I want to pivot now to one closing thought. I'll give Chief a comment, and then I'll close us out for the week. As you recall, in mid-March, the president was saying stay at home. The governor of California said stay at home. We were talking about flattening the curve. Very much, let's not get sick because this is deadly, deadly, deadly. If you can think back that long, and that we had of we're going to prevent everything at all costs. We have almost swung 180 from that as a society, and now we're assuming and accepting a lot of risk. But in that assumption and acceptance of a lot of risk, because you as an individual, or maybe even you are lucky enough as a household to not have somebody that you commingle with or cohabitate with that's high risk, remember that not all of us are that fortunate. And also remember that just because you are that fortunate doesn't mean that COVID can't hurt you and your family as well. And so for those that are high risk, and for those that live with or have close family that are high risk, we need to remember that it is our requirements, our obligation, and our duty to minimize risk for that part of our team as well. And so don't just do this for you and your family. Do this for your coworker who might have a high-risk child, or your coworker or a teammate that may have a high-risk spouse, or in my case, a senior leader who has a parent that resides with them, and that parent is by definition high risk. And so there's a small but very, very vulnerable portion of our population that I believe is just as scared as most of us were in March. And now they're potentially even more scared because the rest of us are acting a little bit brazen, a little bit too bravado, if you ask me or want my opinion on it. We need to remember them and respect them and have concern for them. One very simple, very effective way that you can continue to show that respect is make sure that you wear a mask. Wear because you care. Comply with the best practice principles that you can get from the CDC, or you can drop off my directive or any one of a number of places. And that's how you can show those folks that are high risk and they can't avoid it, that we care about them just as much today and tomorrow and next week as we did back in February and March, while we're also simultaneously figuring out how to get mission back to the maximum that we can. And so that thought on taking care of the vulnerable amongst us and the high risk amongst us is a very important thought as you think about what you do, when you do it, and where you do it. Chief, your thoughts for the week?
Yes, sir. So each Friday, I kind of look back because the weeks are all a whirlwind. The amount of things going on, the amount of meetings, the amount of initiatives and things we're trying to fix, sometimes they blend together. Sometimes it's hard to remember. So every Friday, I like to look back and try to figure out what happened this week. This week, and this Friday, this morning, was probably the first one in a while where everything was pretty, I don't want to say normal, but it's probably the closest to normal it's been. And I mean normal as in pre-COVID. Now, there were a lot of masks, and there was some telework, and there were some things involved. But this week we had first-term airmen center. So we had our first-term airmen do their course just like they would normally do. Now, that happened in a virtual environment. Their face-to-face meetings were on the football field over by the track so they could maintain separation. But we had new airmen show up to the base and be kind of immersed in our culture. At the same time, I got to speak at ALS, our Airmen Leadership School, and we're going to have our first post-COVID Airman Leadership School graduation next week. I sat down in a meeting where we discussed Master Sergeant promotions and what would that look like when the list comes out, which is projected for the third week of July. You know, how are we going to celebrate those brand new Master Sergeants? How are we going to do the professional development that we normally do for brand new Master Sergeants? I PT'd with our Security Forces Squadron. So we had a group of Security Forces airmen, most of which who arrived post-COVID, get through phase 1 training, which means now not only are they, have they shown up, but they got trained, they got tested, and they are ready to start defending this base, solo and as groups of teams. And so they've made it through that final piece. At the same time, we had our changes of command, and all these things are happening. One of the coolest things is Wednesday or Tuesday, we handed out about 200 free Chick-fil-A meals to our airmen in the dorms as a way to say just thank you for being here and thank you for being with us. And then on Wednesday, our Force Support Squadron, along with our chaplains, along with the Airmen and Family Readiness Center, did a drive-through carnival for all of our deployed members. And so the members, or the families of deployed members, came through. They did a photo booth. They had caricatures ready to go for them. The team made sure that those families knew that they were loved, they were respected, they were honored and taken care of, and they knew who to talk to if they needed help. And there is no way that we'll ever be able to thank those families enough. But those are all things that we normally did in February and in January and December before that. And those are standard ways that this base took care of its airmen, and so it's great to see all of those things continue, albeit a little bit differently than normal. But I saw more of a new normal this week than I have in a long time, and I can start to picture what it's going to look like as we move into July, August, and then into the fall. And so keep coming up with those ideas, keep finding ways, and if it's the right thing to do for the airmen and for the family, you're going to have my support 100%. So thank you for everything you're doing, and please let us know how we can help. Sir?
Yeah, so my final thought this Friday, I'll sign off with something you've heard me talk about. I haven't had a chance to foot stomp it a lot recently, but remember that we continue to be in forefront combat operations. And I don't use that word lightly. We are no joke in forefront combat operations. So often the attention or the focus that we get here are in two of the forefronts and we forget the other two. The one that gets a lot of focus and got a lot of focus during this town hall is our fight against COVID. That's a fight in the homeland. It's combat operations. Think of it as, if you will, the equivalent of a chem warfare environment, right? We're getting better at operating in that environment, but don't lose sight of the fact that it is one of our combat environments. It does impact our families, which is unique to from the other three. Directly. It involves our communities, which is unique from the other three directly as well. But the other three elements that we're fighting in and continue to fight in combat operations and in many cases combat posture are the cyber environment. Our increased reliance on telecommuting and our increased reliance of virtual devices is opening up new opportunities for our enemies to take advantage of that. So continue to fight as you did before and look for ways that you can perform better or fight better or be more secure in the virtual environments as you utilize the increased capabilities and, if you will, attack surfaces that we're presenting to our enemy in the cyber domain. The third combat front that we're in is we are still sending airmen downrange to take the fight to our nation's adversaries tonight. So the fight tonight and the fight tomorrow that our airmen are downrange supporting right now, and we have other airmen preparing to go, has not gone away due to COVID. And in addition to actually being in open hostilities warfare, they're also fighting the COVID and the cyber fight downrange. So as you, and if you are the family member of or an airman that's about to deploy, is deployed, or has just returned from deployment, we're with you, and we are not ignorant to the fact that that is one of the 4 combat fronts that we fight from at Edwards Air Force Base. And the fourth one is our quintessential test mission. So our combat operations, our combat fight, as an installation from the test perspective, is to make sure that we accelerate to the maximum extent we can future capability so that the future joint force providers have the best possible equipment, tactics, techniques, and procedures they can to help tomorrow's warfighter. And tomorrow's warfighter could be 10 years out or it could be 10 days out, but we're doing everything in between and maybe even a little bit beyond that. And so those are our 4 combat fronts. And so if we get overly wrapped up or overly focused on any one of those and forget the other 3, that's a vulnerability that I'm not willing to accept, and I know you're not either. So help, work, continue to enforce, reinforce, and provide opportunities or recommendations for our improvement in all 4 of those combat front areas. And that's that type of a thought, that agility, that innovative spirit is very, very ripe and robust at this installation and at Plant 42. And it's for that reason that I am highly confident that a lot of the risks we're taking in that first combat front, like I said, in COVID, to enable the other three and your quality of life are worth it. And I trust you. But it doesn't mean that it's going to be a free-for-all. So continue to do what you know is right when you know it's right to do it, and that it will be able to move all four of those combat fronts in the right direction simultaneously. And for that, I thank you. I thank you for what you've done this week. I thank you for what you're going to do next week. I thank you for your sacrifices. And I also thank you for your attention and your interaction here today. I cannot wait for this to go back in person, but until then, we will be here every Friday, as long as it's not a holiday like next Friday. We'll be here every Friday at 1300 for this type of a town hall. So until then, be well, be safe, and so long for now from Takata 2.